Okay, so here's what we're doing, right? We have our nation, state, and city, right? We've decided on some data types we're going to use in particular for the primary keys. I'm not sure that for those that actually did it, you probably use some sort of an integer, I'm guessing, for the population, right? And that's perfectly good. So what we have then is we have our three creates, right? Nation, city, and state. Now, quick question. I know this is rhetorical. Obviously, it's going to make a difference the order I run these, right? For example, if I just pick one at random, as long as I don't pick nation, and I click execute, oh, I get all kinds of nice errors, okay? Don't be afraid of these red errors. The red just means they're important, right? It means read them, okay? Don't click, oh gosh, I gotta get that off the screen, you know? Actually take time because it'll explain things. Foreign key, FK, nation, state, references invalid table, nation. In other words, hey, we don't have a nation yet. So with this bit of code in here, right, that our foreign key constraint is going to reference the nation table, in particular the nation ID column in that table, well, that's not going to work unless we actually have the nation table there. Same thing with city if I try to execute this, right? So you might say, well, trial and error will work here. Keep running them until I get one that works. Oh, there we go. Nation worked, right? So that's what we discussed. We might use something like a char2, okay? And then a varchar 50 or something like that for the nation name. And then we only have the one constraint to worry about. This is the only, right? The only table that has no foreign key. Think about that. That should make sense because it stands on its own. There is no parent, right, to this nation table. It's at the top of the hierarchy of it's like the grandparents, okay, and then the parents and the children type of thing, grandchildren, right? So as the very top, it doesn't actually have any foreign key contained in it. It's the highest on the food chain is another way to put it. Okay, so we have a little bit of data we're inserting here. Again, because we don't have an integer identity, notice I can use that short form of the insert where I don't have to mention the field names. I just supply a value for each. There's only two, right? But still, I'm supplying a value for the nation ID and a value for nation name. So that works perfectly fine. Now, of course, we know which one. Okay? I could try to show you I'll get the same errors again for city, but I think you figured that out by now, that we have to go in order from, in this case, left to right. Follow the one-to-many relationships down, and it's kind of like Pac-Man. You got to eat the dots in that order, right? So going back to SQL, obviously I have to do state next. Okay, make sure when you run these scripts, because these are set up to run the entire thing, if you have anything highlighted, right? Maybe I'm talking about that. If I click execute, it'll come up and say incorrect syntax near the word, or sometimes it'll say it cannot find such and such a command, right? Well, that's only because you have a little bit of the text highlighted, not an entire command. So if you are going to use that technique, make sure you select an entire command at once, otherwise it won't be valid, okay? Or these are often set up to run the whole kit and caboodle at one time, so I can execute, it'll do the create first, and then do the inserts. No problem. Tickety-boot. There we go. So we have our four states that we've entered: Ontario, British Columbia, New York, and Indiana. And all this data is exactly from the instructions that were given, right? So it's just putting in the sample data supplied, given in the question itself. So this one's pretty straightforward, but of course this one, in addition to the primary key, has to have one of those foreign keys, okay? Now, by the way, that squiggly, okay, I can get that to go away. Remember, we can do this going down from edit to IntelliSense, refresh local cache, and then it'll say, okay, I'll go and have a look around, see what I can find. Oh yeah, there is a table named nation now, because you ran that script a minute ago. So this window now knows about it. Okay, and then finally we could create our city in the same way. There we go. So we have all of them created. And it doesn't matter, remember these creates, we save them so that we might want to take them as a starting point for making further changes to the system later on, or just to hand in for marks, or for whatever reason, right? But the tables themselves are in the system, so I already have copies. I'm not going to bother saving them at all, okay? But here inside my own SQL query window, I can just quickly do a select star from, well, maybe I'll do it in order. nation, and save myself a little bit from state. Seeing the IntelliSense is catching up slowly. Select star from city. All right. Oh, I should have been consistent in my capitalization here. I'm going to make a point in a moment. What do you notice that maybe looks a little strange? Just have to. Yeah, state is blue, right?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Aha, excellent.
I
Okay.
didn't find like states to get around that.
Oh, you did, eh? The thing is, this tool color codes keywords and commands and so on. So it just so happens that state was we should have gone with province or region or something, right? In hindsight. But you know, it's not the end of the world. But state is a keyword in the system. So depending on how you write your queries from here on in, you may or may not run into a problem. Actually, they've improved it. It's pretty good now at figuring out that you probably mean the table once it sees it's there rather than the command, okay? But nonetheless, the quick and easy way around it, how do we delimit pretty much anything, the method I've taught you? What do I put around, say, an alias for a column if I want spaces in it?
Single quotes?
You can do single quotes, but I don't. What do I do? Square brackets, right? So throwing square brackets around it will work perfectly fine, and then it knows that it's an identifier as opposed to being a command. Okay? Not that you're wrong. If you use quotes, it will work, but it will only work because by default, all of the databases we create here are based on a model. Okay, it's like a template for any new database we create, and in that model, there's an option set, okay, to recognize quoted identifiers.
So
right?
square brackets let it know that it's not a query, but
That's right. That it's an identifier for something, right? That's not a command word. It's an identifier to identify, in this case, a table, right? Okay, so let's just run that, and we'll see. Sure enough, I should see three outputs. Okay, so I have my 2 nations, I have my 4 states, and I have 7 cities that I've entered in with the sample data provided. Right?
quick question. Sometimes I want to write a note beside the actual code that won't affect it.
Uh-huh.
So I should do, a greater than symbol, 2 dashes, right? But when I highlight it, will that not affect? I mean, it is affecting my.
Okay, good question. We have a question about comments.
Yeah, like I want to leave a
Basically.
comment in there, but it's
Yeah.
not letting me run all 3 when I select it.
Okay. Well, comment if it's you can put a comment out any text to the right of those 2 characters. So I can put a comment here, and you see how it's all green, and of course I've got caps lock on, but that's okay. But I could also, right here at the end of the command, throw a comment in here.
Oh, I got it running. I figured
Okay.
what the problem was.
All right. So you can comment on the same line as executable code, even if it was in the middle of a, like say I had select star from nation, right? I can even put a comment up there. You might say, well, that's in the middle of this overall command. Won't it confuse it? As long as it's at the end of the line, this will still work.
You don't need a closing tag?
No,
Okay.
no. You mean the semicolon?
No, just 2 more dashes.
Oh, no, you don't. Not for a 1-line comment like this. Now, if I were to try and wrap this comment around to the next line, that won't work. This only works on a single line. If you want a multi-line comment, then you use the old /*, right? So if I wanted to make this, helps a lot if I use the right character, right? Now you see everything after that is now a comment. If I want down here, maybe I want to type a bunch more stuff, and I finally want to end my comment, then I just go */. Now all the text below that is no longer part of the comment. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
So those are two different styles of creating a comment. You can do a block comment with the star slash, or you can do inline comments with just a double hyphen. Okay. So basically I have my 3 selects so I can see all of my data. That's good. All right, so the next thing I want to do, it's a little big. I'm going to make my font a little smaller. Let's go back to Blackboard. And right underneath the solution, I have a few sample queries, right? So this is a .sql file. Open in I don't know if this will open a new copy of Management Studio or if it'll just open it inside my current copy. We'll see. Okay, it's opened a new copy of Management Studio, which is kind of a waste, so I'll just cancel. I'm just going to grab all of it because I'm too lazy to bother saving the file first. Come back into my copy that's running already. Okay, I'm just going to save some real estate here, get rid of that. Okay, so what we basically have are some questions to deal with. So these all are to do with now joining these 3 tables together, right? So remember, here, let me just save the real estate again. If I do my 3 selects, right, then I have all this data we see down below, right? 2 of these, 4 of those, 7 cities, and away we go. Now, what if I want to do a select that involves information from more than one, right? Each of those was a separate select command that I have up here, selecting data from the one or the other or the third one, right? In 3 separate commands. So in terms of a join, what we mean there is, what if we want to pull data in one result set instead of having 3 separate tables of results coming out, a single result set that pulls combinations of data from more than one table. Let's start, basically, we'll start with just nation and state, right? So I'm just going to play around with this a little bit here. So I'm just move this up on the screen. So I'll select from nation. Let's say I just start like this, state, okay? Oh, state. Throw my squares around it just so it looks right in color. It'll probably run okay anyway in this case, but there we go. So what I want to select, let's say I want the nation name, and I want to also output the state name. Okay. So nation name and state name from nation comma state. That might be our first thought. I know that this lives in the nation table, but this field lives in the state table. So if I want to include both of those pieces of information in the projection, the output of the query, obviously in my from clause is somehow going to have to work with both tables. Because if I tried to just get all that out of nation, I can simulate that. I'll just leave the comma state out for a moment. If I try to run the query selecting both those fields from the one table, the nation table, I'll get an error, invalid column name. It says, I looked in the box, I opened the nation box under the Christmas tree, I looked in there and I couldn't find state name. Sorry, I couldn't answer your question. Your query wasn't there. If I include state just with a comma separated list here, okay, it found them both, but let's look carefully here at the information returned. Well, that's a little big. Okay? You see what we have? Basically, for each row in the nation table, it's taken that value and returned each row in the state table. And then it went on to the next row in nation, and then returned a record in the output for each row in state, right? We call this a product, because basically you're multiplying each row times the rows in the other one. It gets even worse if I pull in something from, we'll say city name. Okay, maybe I'll come down here first, comma city. Okay, so now I'm pulling data that this is in this table, that one's in that one, so I need all 3 tables somehow referenced in my from clause. When I execute this, just look at the status bar over here, 56 rows, right? That's the product, because basically it's 2 records times 4 records times 7 records. So 8 times 7, 56, right? Makes sense. It's added it all up. But clearly we aren't taking advantage in this case of the fact that there are relationships. That's the problem with a product. And if you ever get suddenly and you're doing one of these questions and suddenly there's a whole bunch of rows and you're thinking, well, that seems like way too much data, check for something like this, because you're probably somewhere not relating the tables to each other. That's what we have to do, is we have to actually say, okay, it's not just from these as a collection of objects. Okay, we don't want to throw all the data to multiply it together. We want to use the relationships that are here, these primary foreign key relationships. So, we only actually see them in the way that they actually do relate in the real system. To do that, let me for now, I'll just take out city again. We'll just work with the first 2 in our first example. Okay? So we just have the 2 tables that are needed to provide the 2 pieces of information we want, right? Okay? Now, so the trick is, instead of just comma separating them, I have to define a way that they relate. Okay? So I'm going to say nation inner join. Inner join state. Okay? So inner join means that we're going to join these 2 together based on the relationship that exists between them. So it's good to say inner join, but we have to further define how. How on earth do these join together? The keyword there is on. So the new keywords we've just learned are inner join and on. On, then we define the primary foreign key relation. So I could say on nation dot, look at that, IntelliSense. Nation ID, okay, that's the primary key of the nation, equals state dot, I'm just putting the square brackets so it knows I'm referring to the table and not the command word. So which is the foreign key in the state table? You can see the IntelliSense coming up there. Which of those 3 should it relate to?
State ID.
Good thought, but no. Nation ID, right? That's the foreign key. Okay? State ID is the primary key of the state table. Nation ID is what we sort of copied over in order to maintain the foreign key relationship, right? So this defines the primary and foreign key relationship between nation and state. So now executing this query, we have 4 outputs. The nation name and the state name. So the states are just shown once each, right? We have 4 states, just we're also showing what the name of the nation is that the state belongs to. We can say belongs to because now we're using the relationship that exists between the 2. Okay? So, if I did want to go back and also be including something from the city table, I know right now I can't just add it to the projection. City name. Maybe I'll even grab city population. Right? If I try to do that right now, I'll once again get those messages about invalid call. Right? It says, hey, you've given me the from clause defines, the overall box of data I have to work with. Those aren't in there, right? City name and city population, they aren't there. So we have to further add the city table, but in order to do that, we have to continue the relationship. We do that this way. Inner join city on state dot state ID equals city dot state ID again, the foreign key. Okay. Yeah, it's smart enough that I'm sure it will run without me putting the square brackets. I'm just going to test that. There we go. Now notice that the number of rows in the output is the number of cities that we have, right? That's how it works, okay? It's just that now we're showing the city information as well as we basically have the state and the nation information as well, right? So it is smart enough that without my square brackets, it actually will work correctly. Okay, so I'm okay. I don't actually have to include them because the system has gotten better. 2 generations ago, using this tool, you had to, or you'd get an error message. But now, they're getting more and more forgiving of our boo-boos. Okay, so that's a more. Whoop, wow, zoom. Okay, now. Before I go, that's a little bit more complicated. We're only going to ask you for the first little while to work with 2 tables at a time, so you only have one of these inner join relationship clauses, right? Later on, we'll be adding more. Sometimes you have 5, 6, 10, right? You interjoin this, interjoin that, you know. And you'll notice that you kind of need to write them the same way we talked about, right? We've talked about doing things in an order, okay? So it's good to start, you know, even if you're going to create tables, you know, start from one end and follow the relationships through. When you write your join clauses, you want to do the same kind of a pattern. Start with one, interjoin to the next, interjoin to the next, interjoin to the next. Okay? The other thing I'd like to emphasize about this, let's look at our model again for a second. As a rule of thumb, when you start working with multiple tables, one of the good things to do is analyze what information is asked for or do you need to process the question, right? If we ask for nation name and city name and population, but we don't ask for the name of the state, then what tables do I need to include in my from clause? Do I need to include the state table? Why? I'm not going to ask for any information stored there. So why do I still need it? Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'll need to include the state table in the from clause just to support the linkages between the whole chain of relationships, even if I don't even ask for any information out of the state table. But if I were to go back and just be asking for nation and state, do I want to include the city? Let me show you what happens, right? So let's modify this query one more time. Maybe I'll make a copy of it because that's kind of a good example. Put a bit of white space there. Okay. Suppose I just want the nation name and the state name. This isn't in the question, right? That's all I'm after. If I include the join to city, I get 7 rows of output. Scratch my head here. Well, all I really need to know is the nation name and the state name. Earlier on, we did a query like that, and we only had 4 rows of output. Each state listed once, showing the name of the country it was in beside it, right? That's because we have this extra join. So it's kind of like a multiplication factor again, because we're going to get a row in the output for every city, even though you see there's a lot of duplication. Right? Ontario, Canada, Ontario, Canada. Well, the reason why it's here twice is because it's 2 different cities in the city table, both in Ontario, Canada. So that's why they get both rows get put in the output. Now, of course, you know by now, what's the key word I could put up here to get rid of duplication? Yeah, I could throw in that ugly looking distinct word, right? And if I ran this query again now, I'd be down to 4 rows. But, you know, that's kind of a waste of time, because I'm actually pulling all those records first and then kind of filtering it out, right? Why not just ask for what you need, okay? And distinct can't always solve the issue for you, right? So the better approach is always look at the model, see what information is needed, what tables it's from, and only, do yourself a favor, only select the minimum number of tables needed to give the information you require, okay? That's probably one of the most helpful tips I can give you this entire term when you start working with multiple tables. Look at what's needed. Now, some things are needed even if they're in the projection, if they're used, say, in a where clause or something. You need to be able to access them, or an order by, right? But see what information is required to deal with the projection, the filter, the ordering, everything else, and only include the tables that contain that or anything that's required to relate them together, okay? So leave out city, and then you'll get the correct answer here. I keep on doing that, right? Leave out this whole inner join clause here, And then now my answer to nation name and state name will give the correct information without a distinct, so I'm not pulling it all together and then cutting out half of it, right? I'm just getting exactly what I wanted in the first place. Okay. So I kind of jumped around myself instead of following these questions. For each nation display its state and city names, output the population. Well, we did that one, right? That's right up here. I'm just going to copy that. Okay. That gives us the nation for each state, city name. Yeah, basically that's asking for everything, right? We have all the nations, the states, the cities, and the population. And okay, we can still apply where criteria, right? So our next question is, which state has the city with the highest population? Ooh, that's kind of a tricky one to put next. Because what do I have to know before I can say what city has the highest population?
What state they're in?
I'm eventually going to know that, but I have to know what the highest population is first. So this is going to need a subquery. When I need to know the answer to one question to answer this one, then I need to do it in a subquery arrangement. So I'll often write a subquery in stages. So answer the innermost question, so to speak. That is, what is the highest population, right? What aggregate function will I apply to city population to find the highest single value of population? Is it minimum, maximum, average, sum, count? Max, right? So max city pop from city. Now that isn't the final answer here. Oh, got a round bracket there because max is a function, aggregate function. So there we go. That is the maximum population of any city, right? So I want to know what state has the city with the highest population, okay? So with that in mind, let me come back here, get my master query that joins everything. Okay, I'll assume that I want to show the state name, not the state code. So I need to include all the tables, okay, with inner joins, 2 inner join clauses. So I'm using all 3 tables. So I want to show the state. So all I want is the nation name, right? Basically, you'll find you'll do this a lot. You just once you get the inner joins worked out, you'll just reuse them over and over again. If it involves all 3 tables, you're just reusing the same inner join arrangement that you already have.
Why are we grabbing the nation name when we want to know the state?
Oh, sorry. We just want to know the state. My apologies. I was thinking the nation. Okay, it's a little easier then. So all we need is the state name. Sorry, I threw everybody off there. So we don't need the nation table, right? So I can take the nation table out. So I can just say state inner join. Inner join city on state ID matches city state ID, right? Okay. So that will give me the state name, and I'm using the state and city, right? So my where clause is going to be where I can reference the city now, right? Equals the maximum population there is, which is this right here. So I'm going to show the name of the state, right, from state inner join city, where the population is equal to the highest population that exists in the system. Okay, that's where we use a subquery to answer the fundamental thing we need to know first. We compare it to the city, and whichever one that is, it will tell me the state because of the join relationship. So Ontario is the state with the city with the highest population.
What would you do if you wanted to show a column of population?
You could include it, right? It
So
just
there
it wasn't
are-
asked for. Because we have the two tables, we could just include it. I could even show the city name if I wanted to. And the city population as well. Okay? It doesn't hurt the query at all to include the extra information. So you can see it's Toronto and Ontario, and that's the population, which by coincidence you probably recognize 248. That's 2,481,494, which is the same number we get when we just run our little subquery, right? So our subquery gave us that number, which is what we used in our where clause to find the city that had that. And even if all we want to know is the state it was in, we know it's Ontario.
You didn't know that?
Okay? It's a little bit old in terms of the population number. Well, I guess it depends on what. Well, it's old anyway, but you know, there's Metro Toronto and then Greater Toronto, right? Greater Toronto is, what is it now?
7 or 5, no?
Around 7 million, something like that. I don't
If
know.
only there was something.
Somebody asks their Siri on their phone or Cortana. Okay, all right. And we can keep on going. Order by is always the last statement. So
2.6, not even close.
display each Canadian state ID and name. Put the city's name in the output 2. Okay, so we just need the state and the city. Order it by population from lowest to highest. Okay, so in this case, to answer this next one, right, we only need 2 tables. So again, we'll just use the from clause with state inner join city, right? Because all the information is contained in just those 2 tables. I can't say this often enough. Look at your model if you need to. Think, okay, which tables do I need to include or work with? And make sure that those are the only ones that you have in the from clause to get the right answer. So state and city have everything I need for this question, right? So that'll be my question there. So we want to see the Canadian state ID and name. So we're going to have something else in here. We're going to have state ID, state name, as well as the city's name. We don't want, oh, I can't put a comma. Okay, so that's our entire projection for the, oh, and we want only in Canada. Oh, we do have a where clause, right? Because it's Canadian, right? So, selecting the state ID and state name, as well as the city's name, from state inner join city on our relationship, where, because we only want Canadian cities. Okay. Now, I'll do it the right way. To compare and know the nation name, say, is Canada, right? I could include the nation table, but of course we do have the foreign key, the nation ID. So it depends. We weren't totally clear in the instructions as to which you should use. So there's 3 different ways I could answer this. I could just use the foreign key that's in the state table, right? Because it's going to be the nation ID, or CA in my case. Ugh, I always do that when I want to do this. Okay? So, where state ID, oh, nation ID, equals CA. Now I can do that because the nation ID is inside the state table, right? Order by from lowest to highest. So city pop. Now by default that'll be lowest to highest. Yeah. So we'll start at the lowest and work up. It'll be in ascending order. So let me just try running that. Now, anyone notice the red underline?
Yes.
Okay?
CID.
Yeah. Okay, let me just, ambiguous column name. Once you start working with these primary foreign key relationships, this situation comes up. But you know, it makes common sense. It should be an issue. Ambiguous. In other words, hey, wait a second, state ID. You're using that column name, but for heaven's sakes, it's in two tables, right? We have a column in the state table called state ID. It happens to be the primary key. But we also have a column in the city table called state ID. So it's ambiguous. All we have to do to get rid of this red underline to solve the error is get rid of the ambiguity. In other words, say which one we're referring to. Truth is, it won't matter in the end. I get the correct answer by prefacing this with either table, but probably the better answer, since I'm really looking for it from the state table, is to say state dot state ID, right? Okay, we've seen how that nomenclature works now. You say the table name and hit dot, and you can refer to the different fields. If you want to get rid of the blue, then you can put the square brackets around it, and that gets rid of the blue, okay? So now this is no longer ambiguous, because we're saying we want the state ID from the state table, and the state name and the city name. Order by city population. Let's see if we get what we're after. Okay. Of course, we won't know. Well, we know Toronto's the biggest, and it's at the bottom, so that would be in ascending order, right? So without including it, but you know, feel free. There's nothing wrong with playing. I can throw in the city population in the projection, use it to check my answer that it is correct, and then before I submit it on a test, take it back out, and I know I'm still giving the correct answer, right?
Why did it auto assume the city population?
Because there's no other table that has city population.
No, sorry. What I meant is, like, why did it auto make it ascending?
The default is always ascending.
Okay.
You only have to say descending, D-E-S-C, if you want it in the reverse order, right? The default is ascending in every case.
Is ascending still a command then?
You can use it, but you don't need to.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the only what's this? We have to watch for that we can have ambiguous columns. Well, there we go. We just saw that, right? So for each nation, show its ID, name, and list of cities. Well, to show the nation ID and name and all the city names, what tables do we need? Obviously, I need nation to get the ID and the name. If I want to show the city names, okay, we've answered this question already. We have to include state in the from clause, even though we're not going to actually show any information coming out of there. So, someday I'll learn. I'm going to go back here, start with my query that has all three joins, right? Because I need all of them. So rather than typing it from scratch. Okay, so I'll get rid of this. Okay, what do we want? We want to show for each nation its ID. So nation ID, nation name, and city name. And again, I have a red underline because that's ambiguous. Right? It even tells me that when I put my mouse over top of the red squiggly, right? Ambiguous column name because it exists in two tables. Just to show you that I do get the right answer, I could say state dot nation name, nation ID. So I have 7 rows in the output. Not surprising because I have 7 cities, right? So there's 1 row for each city. I'm just happy to be showing the nation ID and nation name. Now, do I get the same answer if I change this to nation? Yeah, exactly the same output. So, you know, it often doesn't matter You might say the system should be smart enough, even if it's ambiguous and getting the same result. That's not always the case in every situation, though. So it just doesn't let you be ambiguous, is all it comes down to. And I usually prefer to, since it's actually the nation I'm talking about, I usually get it from the closest location of the field, right? Coming from the nation table. Okay, so that's a good discussion of those. So it's just about break. What I'm going to do is feel free to take your break, but we have a assignment. Oh, it's not there yet. Hang on. I'll fix that.